Consumer use of telehealth services has exploded in the past 18 months. Parks Associates' latest data shows that 64% of consumers used a telehealth service in 2021, up from only 15% in 2019. Beginning in 2020, telehealth and telemedicine solutions were thrust to the forefront of healthcare as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The need to avoid exposure to the virus has reversed well-established consumer preferences for in-person visits over remote care. Radical shifts in the regulatory and reimbursement landscape have paved the way for rapid telehealth deployments. Our new quantified consumer study, Virtual Care, Connected Health Devices and Services, provides trending data on 5,000 broadband household responses about familiarity, use, and demand for telehealth services and connected health devices. It evaluates user experience with these services and consumer demand for virtual care as a standard offering. For more information on this new research, please contact our team at sales@parksassociates.com.
We are so excited to welcome you to our Connected Health Summit 2022 series. Throughout this year, we will gather and share Parks Associates' latest research on connected health devices and solutions for consumers and bring the industry together to share their vision of our future of healthcare. After 2 years of virtual events, we're also announcing the return of our in-person events in 2022. We hope you can join us in September as we gather again for impactful sessions with insights from industry leaders and best-of-class research from Parks Associates analysts. Nothing beats the knowledge, conversations, and community that come from meeting in an in-person setting. We survey 10,000 broadband households each quarter to provide the most reliable and accurate view of the connected health market. This year, Connected Health Summit addresses opportunities for new solutions, including smart home platforms, telehealth services, voice assistants, and wearables to empower consumers, caregivers, and providers with new insight into patient health. Healthcare and technology providers have the opportunity to have an extraordinary impact on health and wellness through new applications and services in chronic care management, remote access to care, independent living, and wellness and fitness. We will discuss consumer behaviors and changing demands driven by the pandemic and new business models, IoT solutions, and deployments emerging to target these new healthcare needs. Thank you again for joining us at Connected Health Summit. If you miss a live session, you can go back at any time to watch on demand. Go to Watch Replays and click on the session that you want to view. Have you created your own event agenda in SwapCard? Visit the Agenda and Watch Replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths in the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the SwapCard platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page.
Hello, and welcome back to Connected Health Summit. I'm Jennifer Kent, Vice President of Research at Parks Associates, and I'm so pleased to be kicking off 2 days of research and discussions about the connected health market. If you're just joining us for the first time this year, welcome. We have had multiple virtual sessions occurring across the year featuring both Parks Associates research and perspectives from leading thinkers across the connected health landscape. Today and tomorrow, we'll be focusing on remote patient monitoring, wearables, and business models. And join us again in October to focus on how technologies, services, and people are working together to better care for seniors and for their caregivers. Of course, Connected Health Summit is just one of several executive conferences that Parks Associates hosts, in addition to Connections, which covers the full landscape of technology in the modern connected home, Smart Energy Summit that focuses specifically on home energy management solutions, and the future of video, which dives deeply into the connected entertainment landscape. So we certainly welcome you to join us for all of our events. I'd like to take a minute just to thank our sponsors. We really could not be hosting these sessions and bringing Connected Health Summit to you without the support of ADT Medical Alert, Alarm.com, Beckler, EarlySense, Johnson Controls, Rapid Response Monitoring, and Independa. We also appreciate all of our supporters, from media organizations to industry alliances and other organizations who support this event. Thank you for getting the word out about Connected Health Summit. So today I'm going to start off with some of Parks Associates' insight pulling from our 2022 Connected Health Survey that just fielded in May, where we survey 5,000 U.S. internet households about their familiarity and use of virtual care products and services, and what it is that they'd like, what their preferences are, and what they'd like to see happen in the future.
We will open up to our first interactive panel focusing on remote patient monitoring and from getting industry viewpoints from Biotricity, Homeward, Omron Healthcare, and Beckler. Then we'll have a keynote with Adam Pellegrini, who's the CEO and co-founder of Jasper Health, with our president and chief marketing officer, Elizabeth Parks. And then we'll have a full panel focusing specifically on wearables for health and featuring industry perspectives from Rapid Response Monitoring, the Stanford School of Medicine, Movano, Aura, and Garmin. So to start, what do we mean by connected health and health at home? This is a very large umbrella term, which we see as composed of 4 major groups or pillars. Healthcare at home bridges care that happens at the facility in a doctor's office, let's say, with the consumer at home and going about the rest of their lives. Telehealth solutions, remote patient monitoring, and home visit services. Solutions designed for seniors are called out specifically as seniors are often the highest utilizers of health resources with multiple comorbidities. And this demographic is growing in the US and in many developed countries. Connected health solutions serve and empower seniors and support their family caregivers. There's also a new focus on the health of our indoor environments, such as water quality and air quality in particular being of renewed concern. And finally, at-home wellness and fitness would include devices and services commonly paid for by consumers like smartwatches, fitness trackers, connected weight scales, and smart fitness equipment, and also including virtual fitness classes, coaching services as well. These devices are becoming ever more capable with medical-grade sensors providing new real-time insight into the user's health status. And all of these categories have seen some major changes over the past few years, as well as accelerating demand. In fact, one of the biggest trends we at Parks are seeing is that consumers overall are much more aware of and interested in all aspects of their health than they were pre-pandemic. Helping to drive this demand is an overall market shift over the past few years, driven by the pandemic and its ripple effects. Health at home has gone mainstream. Approximately 2/3 of consumers now consider themselves familiar with telehealth services, and the majority engaged directly with remote care in the past 12 months in the comfort of their own homes in some form or fashion. So over the phone, through chat or text messages, or through video visits. Now, this is down slightly from May 2021, capturing the 12 months prior to that May 2021 survey, really the height of the pandemic. But that 55% utilization rate in the past year is still more than 3 times higher than that 2019 pre-pandemic rate. Adoption of connected health products that directly monitor a consumer's health status and vital signs also have reached majority adoption, with 54% of US internet households owning at least one wearable, connected weight scale, smart blood pressure cuff, or any number of connected medical and wellness devices now available through remote patient monitoring programs, employee wellness programs, and also, of course, directly to the consumer. In fact, we see a growing demand for these 2 elements of virtual care, the devices and the services, to come together. 47% of US internet households say that the ability to share data from an internet-connected health device with a healthcare provider during the telehealth visit is very important to them. Looking at remote patient monitoring, or RPM in particular, there are a variety of ways that people may participate in these types of programs. Traditionally and most frequently is to monitor a chronic condition like diabetes or COPD, or to diagnose a potential issue such as a cardiac condition, a sleep problem, sleep apnea, or other issue that may be best detected outside of the physician's office and in the course of a person's normal day. Recently, remote patient monitoring has been used to monitor patients' recovery from illness, particularly COVID-19, and to monitor a patient's status after being released from the hospital for a certain number of days or months. And taking all of these use cases together, 40% of consumers in US internet households report having participated at some point in time in an RPM program. Now, I mentioned seniors earlier, and I want to focus on this segment for just a minute. The pandemic revealed how vulnerable many seniors are, some major issues and lack of access to care, but also to isolation and loneliness. And family caregivers indicate that they are looking for solutions that help, and that they want virtual care to be part of the solution. So 2/3 of caregivers in evaluating independent living type solution services, products that can help them care for their loved one, 2/3 said that they want support for online medical appointments and the ability to monitor the vital signs of their loved one with any sort of senior developed solution that they're evaluating. And while we've made so much progress in the connected health space in just the past few years, when you focus on the people, you know that progress is uneven. We have clear virtual care enthusiasts and those who are at risk of being left behind or falling behind. Households with children at home, by almost any measure we look at, are your virtual care enthusiasts. That also results in a spike in use and familiarity among people between the ages of 35 and 44 generally, also those who live in urban areas. Ironically, the roots of telehealth service are in connecting rural areas with specialists who typically reside in more urban metropolitan areas, yet those living in a rural area are still much less likely to be using telehealth services today. And we'll talk a little bit more today about how industry leaders are working to close those gaps. And finally, when you look beyond growth into the details of implementation, much of the work that remains right in front of us is all about getting the data right. How do we integrate device data into the EMR? Keep personal health data private and secure, but also easily shareable when needed. What opportunities are there to see real-time data, and when is that overkill? When does intermittent data actually serve all stakeholders better? What's the best approach to collecting data? A very personal device that can pick up vital signs like a wearable, or a more passive approach like room or bed sensors that can pick up movement and respiration and even heart rate remotely and detect nighttime deterioration when a wearable is maybe recharging. Is a kit of best of breed single purpose health devices the best implementation, or multifunctional devices that are kind of all-in-ones? There's no real clear answer to many of these questions, and the answers are often dependent on the specific use case and even the specific provider or patient. But everyone you'll hear from today is working on these questions of implementation and getting that right. So on this first panel today, we will discuss the new role of remote monitoring in healthcare, evaluate strategies for reaching people where they are and addressing gaps in care, and hearing how market leaders are building models that work to make remote patient monitoring sustainable. So give us just a minute and we'll be right back with our panelists.
Welcome back. I'm Elizabeth Parks. I'm the president and CMO of Parks Associates, and I'm excited to lead today's panel about remote patient monitoring. We're going to talk about the radical changes that have taken place over the past few years, the transition to health-to-home care, the emphasis on value-based care, the role of reach through remote patient care with the rural communities, and now how new connected health devices are being integrated to help doctors and consumers better understand their health. We're going to start with brief introductions from our panelists and then go straight into Q&A. As a reminder, please put any questions in the chat or the Q&A box on Swapcard, and we'll take them as they come in. Also, I'd like to go ahead and note the polling question on the right side of your swap card screen. Please go ahead and respond so that we can better understand your feedback on the top challenges for remote patient monitoring. So let's go ahead and get started and introduce our panelists. We have an awesome lineup today, including speakers from Biotricity, Homeward, Omron Healthcare, and Frias and Beckler. So let's go ahead and bring our panelists in for brief introductions. We're going to start with Dr. Waqas Al-Siddiq. So let's go ahead and bring you in and see if you could do a brief introduction of your role and some of the things you've been working on.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everybody for joining today. I'm Waqas Al-Siddiq, and I'm the founder and CEO of Biotricity. And one of the things that we really focused on at the company was the issue around cardiac disease. So, cardiac disease is the #1 killer in pretty much every country in the world. And the challenge really is around the nature of cardiac issues because they're intermittent, it's silent, many patients are asymptomatic. And so we started with this idea of smart monitoring and created a smart diagnostic monitor, which allows you to collect ECG data from a patient when in the comfort of their home. And when it detects an anomaly, it actually transmits it to a call center and deals with emergency response so you can get patients in and treat them before a catastrophic event occurs. And we took that, and now we're moving into disease management because, as diabetics have glucometers and patients with hypertension have blood pressure monitors, when it comes to cardiac issues, patients don't really have anything. And again, intermittent and asymptomatic, you need long-term data. And so we created a whole chronic disease management program that is really focused on cardiac patients and enabling them with devices that can collect cardiac data specifically, so that just as a diabetic has a glucometer, a cardiac patient has the tools that they need to manage their condition when they're outside of the hospital. Because as we know, chronic diseases, spend about 75 cents of every dollar in terms of healthcare. And really, in order to solve that challenge, you really need to create a program that engages the patient, because once they've been diagnosed, there's no cure. So you really need them to take ownership and get engaged. And so that's really our journey. We went from diagnostics, now we're in disease management, and really trying to solve and focus around this issue with the cardiac condition and how to manage it and deliver better outcomes.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that introduction and really fascinating numbers. Of course, we are really focused on outcomes. And so I think this is a really interesting data you're sharing. Thanks for joining us today. Next up, we have Umar Kendall, president of Homeward. So thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got an amazing background you're going to share with us and some of the experience you have, but let's let you introduce yourself and Homeward.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So Homeward's mission is to re-architect the delivery of health and care in partnership with communities everywhere. And we're starting in rural America. And the reason for that is that healthcare for rural Americans is massively broken. It shows up in the outcomes. We see 23% higher mortality. We're starting to understand why some of these things are happening. And one very obvious issue is the lack of access. So we have about half as many primary care physicians. We have about an eighth as many specialty care physicians. And so unsurprisingly, this means people aren't getting the preventative care they need. They aren't getting the high quality care that they need. And so enormously poorer outcomes. But it's a problem that we believe is solvable. And so Homeward's approach has been to really flip the model. And instead of starting with a hospital and building a big feeder system around it and hoping that people will come in and maybe drive the 90 minutes or an hour plus just to get routine preventative care, we start out in the home. So we deliver home visits, in-person care. While we're in the home, we're able to prepare our members with the right kinds of monitoring technology for continuing to track their chronic conditions. Additionally, we find that we're able to participate in the community. And so in addition to being out in people's homes, sometimes the best place to get care is at near your local pharmacy or near your local grocery store. And so Homeward has a mobile clinic service that rotates through communities, dramatically reduces the hassle and friction associated with coming to see a provider, where we can deliver more comprehensive care. That might mean minor procedures. It might mean more advanced diagnostics. And then finally, when we are caring for our members over the long term, this is really where remote monitoring and virtual care kicks in. So how can we observe and be proactive when we see that numbers might be heading in the wrong direction, whether it's blood sugars in the case of diabetes, whether it's other parameters, blood pressure in the case of hypertension, early indicators of rapid weight gain in the case of heart failure. All of these elements really allow us to take a much more proactive approach, which is something that these rural communities have never seen before. And it starts to bridge the gap that we're all experiencing here, that's been accelerated even further by the exodus and retirement of primary care doctors, the closing of rural hospitals. So we believe that by truly making an impact, we need to flip the model. And so that's what we're doing here at Homeward.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. And can you share your previous work experience for our audience as well? Because I think that's an important note.
Absolutely. Yes. My background is most recently, I was the chief product officer at Teladoc Health, where I had responsibility for all of the product lines in virtual care, telemedicine, and remote monitoring. I made my way to Teladoc by way of Livongo, where I'd also been the chief product officer, and helped to build that company from its early days in 2014 through our ultimate acquisition in 2020. And throughout my experience in both of those places, I came to really appreciate both what the strengths are of telemedicine and remote monitoring, but also some of the limitations. And that's very much informed the work we're doing at Homeward, which means a model that really bridges those things that are best done in person and those things that are best done with the help of technology from afar.
Well, that's great. And, we really love having people like you join who've got a wealth of experience and then, really look to solve problems through, a whole new business solution. So good job to you for launching this. And we look forward to hearing more. We've got Dan McCaffrey, who's Vice President of Digital Health and Software at Omron Healthcare. So Dan, thanks so much for being with us today. Let's let you do an introduction of your role and Omron.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to today. So as you mentioned, I'm currently the Vice President of Digital Health at Omron Healthcare. I've dedicated my career to researching and building products and services that empower people to better manage their health, previously serving as the head of product for digital health at Samsung Electronics. So our team at Omron has over 50 years of heart health experience focused on helping patients monitor their health directly at home. And we're introducing innovative heart health technologies that serve as the next step towards our mission of going for zero. This is the elimination of heart attacks and strokes. And so our most recent innovation is our service platform known as VitalSight, the first remote patient monitoring offering from Omron Healthcare. It's designed specifically for hypertension management and developed to foster greater patient to physician communication. I'm a big believer in remote patient monitoring as a tool to improve communication between a doctor and physician.
Great. So thank you so much for joining us. And certainly Omron is a massive player in the market here, developing these new products. And that's awesome too, that you're bringing some of your experience over from Samsung. So we appreciate you being here and look forward to hearing more. Next, we have Brock Winsler, President of Freus, Beckler Workforce Safety, and Beckler Connected Wellness. So Brock, thank you so much for joining us. Let's let you do a brief introduction of your role and what's going on over there at Freus and Beckler.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. This is quite a privilege to be here with everyone today. As you mentioned, I'm the president of Freus and Beckler, our Connected Wellness division. And at Beckler, we have the privilege of serving nearly 1.5 million individuals with our platform and our products. And we really are focused in on driving better outcomes. So we partner with solution providers, and we have an AI-powered engagement platform to dramatically improve engagement with patients prior to, during, and after the service period. And we found this helps to extend the contract life and drive better health outcomes. Our solution providers that we partner with, they're also using two-way voice cellular devices. You'll see them down there in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. These devices are revolutionary in size, weight, and battery life, but they also have the ability to gather powerful insights like activity monitoring, step tracking. They're capable of performing fall detection. But they also can be used as a wearable. These wearables can be used as a hub for other Bluetooth-enabled devices to collect vitals. So pulse oximeters, glucometers, scales. And so we are partnering with solution providers to provide our services to the world. We are a wholesale service provider. And again, it's great to be with you here today, and we look forward to the discussion.
Okay, great. So let's get into the discussion. Really, we want to start off and talk about what's the current state of remote patient monitoring. You know, we spent the last few years getting through COVID, seeing dramatic increases in telehealth usage and familiarity grow across really every demographic segment, and consumers really embracing virtual care. This plays directly into those consumers who have specific conditions that need to be monitored or who are getting sent home. And so I want to start off and asking Dan, if you could tell us a little bit more about where you see the current state of the market as it relates to RPM.
Yeah, great question. There's no doubt that the current state of remote patient monitoring is set up for enormous growth, right? We're riding the wave of the pandemic, and we've never seen a greater interest, both from the clinical side and from the patient side. Clinical side being doctors, nurses, administrators, and so Omron has been in the business of at-home monitoring for over 50 years, and we introduced our remote patient monitoring business roughly 2 years ago. And we've attracted interest across the U.S., New York, Chicago, L.A., and it just continues to grow. And so through the development of VitalSight over the last roughly 5 years for Omron, every year we have seen continued interest, growth, adoption, integration, all of the above, following the launch of the product into the market. In terms of some of the newer components that I've noticed is recent clinical validation has become a common theme in the discussions with the doctors and the nurses. And so accuracy for doctors is a newer trend in terms of the ability to bring these remote devices in a clinical accurate approach directly into the workflow for doctors. And so I think those are two or three of the bigger advances that I've noticed over the last roughly 2 or 3 years since we introduced VitalSight into the market.
Yeah, those are great comments, Dan. Let me follow up a question on that. So do you think that these clinical validation is coming as a result of having enough devices in the market to track, or is there, different ways that you were able to see the outcomes? I mean, is it purely because we've reached, some saturation in the market where that testing is really able, or are the devices getting better?
It's a combination for sure. I think remote patient monitoring is graduating to a place where, we're moving beyond the health trackers and really integrating signals that doctors care about. And so on one hand, the devices have graduated to a clinically relevant, technology position. And then, so that's the push. And then from the pull side, the doctors are saying, I want my data to be clinically tested. I want to make sure that I'm putting my patients on products and platforms that have gone through the rigorous process. And so I really believe it's a push and a pull system that is bringing remote patient monitoring forward.
Okay, great. Waqas or Dr. Al-Siddiq, I'm not sure what you prefer. I'm sure you worked hard for that doctor in the beginning there. But let me ask a follow-up question about choice and this demand that's coming in. Certainly the clinical side is helping validate these devices, getting the devices into the market. But what about this perception of choice and expectations that we see happening with consumers in the world we live in now?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think that, before the pandemic and at least now with the advent of devices and accessibility, what's happening from the consumer side is that consumers are a lot more aware of technology. As Dan was just talking about, the accuracy as they're talking to their doctors, the doctors are talking about the clinical aspect. They're educating these consumers in terms of explaining to them how these measurements and how this data is actually driving better outcomes, driving their decision making, driving medication changes. And so I think the consumer themselves have become a lot more aware. And it's almost like a transformation where we had telemedicine on one side, we had remote patient monitoring on the other side, and the two are coming together to create this digital health experience where it's more integrated. And that's causing consumers, I think, to look at from a choice perspective, not just a device that can collect, pulse oximeter reading or a blood pressure reading, but how does that map into their overall digital health experience, and how does that data transfer over to their doctor, and how does that doctor engage? So I think consumers now, whereas a couple of years ago they were looking at devices for personal use and collecting data, now they're looking at devices and technologies that are accurate and integrate within their care program. So how does that information translate? How does that information get to their doctor? How does that doctor use that? And a couple of years ago, that last piece and that last part of the conversation was never really at the forefront of a consumer's mind. But I'm at least seeing that individuals and patients, they're really asking, okay, how does this information get to my doctor? What is my doctor going to use this information for? How does this get into the EMR? How does this create a holistic view of that individual? And they also want access to that information as well. So I think that's a big transformation from personal consumption of data versus an individual understanding that data is going to be consumed by their entire care team. And they're very aware of that. And they're using that as a metric to decide which technology to adopt or use or purchase or grab.
Yeah, those are great comments, and our research does support that. Our latest consumer data showing that 28% of households intending to purchase a wearable device within the next 6 months, 95% willing to pay for a wearables model if it has advanced health features, and 66% who would pay more if it can accurately measure certain things like blood pressure. So, of course, consumers don't always do what they tell us they're going to do, but these are very good indications of what consumers want. And I think, COVID has really sped up those expectations of what could and should be able to happen in terms of information coming from providers. This does speak to this idea of the digital front door. And so I want to see if I can throw that term out there and maybe see who would like to pick up on what does that mean, the digital front door for care. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on that particular term? Umar?
I'm happy to start. Sure. I think it's a beautiful idea that consumers are going to start somewhere digital in their participation in healthcare. And I mean, there are plenty of examples of how a first healthcare encounter can be initiated on the web. In fact, the one that we all know is Dr. Google, and the fact that when you have a question, generally speaking, one of the first places you might go is to do a search for the kinds of symptoms you have to figure out what's going on. I think that this idea of a digital front door has gotten a little bit overloaded. And the premise that that it also means that a person can self-navigate themselves to the right place to get care. It does place a lot of burden on the consumer and the patient. So I think that there are a lot of really interesting experiments that are happening, everything from trying to figure out, can you do a symptom checker or a triage module? I mean, some recent data on symptom checking is that it's not predictive enough really to serve that purpose of being, the entryway maybe, or the lobby of a digital front door. So in the broadest terms, do people start digital? They probably do in most parts of their life in some sort of way. How much work that digital front door is really going to do, I think, is the big question. And I think that the more important question we should be asking ourselves is, what does the overall care experience look like? What are the places where technology plays an enabling role for access to care? And subsequently to that, to quality of care and improvement in outcomes. And I think we'll see segments of the market for whom a digital front door achieves those purposes, where we're increasing access, reducing hassles and friction, and ultimately improving the outcomes that people see. But I'd be cautious about putting too much hope in the idea that all consumers are going to enter through a digital front door, because that's simply not where we are. We spend a lot of time at Homeward focused on older adults, and so in the population of people who are 65 plus, those are mostly not digital front door consumers. Those are patients who start off with a trusting relationship with a provider, typically in or near their community. And so if that's the first place that they want to go, our job is to make that easy. And at Homeward, we are that provider. We participate in delivering care directly ourselves. We want to be that first phone call so that a person knows that they can come to us for any kind of care they want. But if we were to put a digital front door in between us and our patients, we know we'd lose a lot of them because they're not always comfortable with technology, particularly when it comes to complex topics like healthcare.
Yeah, great comments. I think you're really speaking to this omni-channel of services and that idea of choice and meeting consumers where they're at, lots of different segments to cater to. And certainly that rural aspect, along with seniors, creates a really a whole new world to consider. Let me see if you can expand a little bit further with some of the use cases you're seeing for remote patient monitoring within the areas that you serve.
Sure. Yeah. It's been a tremendous evolution. I think our industry has made enormous progress. I think, my colleagues here on the call are great representatives on behalf of the strides we've made during COVID, but really leading up into COVID, because we were all collectively as an industry building these great technologies for remote patient monitoring that weren't seeing a lot of wide-scale adoption either by consumers or by providers. And there's been a transformational moment, as we saw in the early part of this presentation, in terms of adoption. I think what we're settling into is some of those use cases that are really driving value, and they're not the ones that we may have started out with pre-COVID, which were consumer interest in tracking biometrics for wellness purposes. Instead, I think we've made this very important shift to meaningful tracking of health conditions that, if not tracked, could otherwise escalate or could result in an acute event. So those are areas like monitoring blood sugars for the avoidance of severe hypoglycemia. There are things like monitoring weight so that we can detect dramatic changes in fluid retention in the context of heart failure. Those kinds of areas for monitoring are really some of the top use cases. And I say this for a couple of reasons. Not only do patients immediately perceive the benefit of not having to either manually log these data and try to share them with their physician in some way. They perceive the benefit of the physician reaching out to them in order to avoid an unnecessary visit. So that's great news. Providers perceive the benefit, particularly given that they had no access to their patients for this period of time, and now suddenly they've seen what the power is of having data seamlessly flowing into their ecosystem. But probably most importantly, or as importantly, is the alignment of incentives with payers. And I think that's a really important concept for us to talk about when it comes to the adoption of remote patient monitoring. It's something that we see driving use cases in a lot of ways, because if we start with this question of where there are opportunities to not only improve the quality of care, but also take out excess cost, well, the answer is unnecessary emergency room visits, it's unnecessary hospitalizations, it's unnecessary advanced diagnostics. And all of those areas are what lead us to the use cases in remote monitoring that provide us the opportunity to prevent those escalations. So working our way back, that's going to include the monitoring of COPD and severe respiratory conditions. It's going to include better and more advanced home-based diagnostics, whether that's blood tests to measure things like A1C and cholesterol, whether it's DNA for the tracking of risk factors associated with cancer. I mean, the model is now being figured out where the incentives are starting to align, and that's going to open up even more broadly the set of use cases that are going to have meaningful clinical impact as well as ultimately cost savings to make all this work sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there really is so much to talk about, and we are in the early stages of all this. So, Brock, let me see if we can get your perspective on top use cases, and in particular, the role of PERS and expanded senior care solutions. So we'll stick with the older population here and serving them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Elizabeth, a couple of years ago, as we started looking more closely at how our market of providing emergency services will, come together with RPM, what we saw was that obviously COVID was happening at the same time. There was a real challenge of getting these devices into the home, getting them installed, and then getting people to use the devices. And so we chose to focus on engagement and finding a way that we could engage the subscribers through our communication devices, through outbound AI technologies to get those patients to engage with us. But beyond that, to also access data. One of the things that we notice is, beyond them just using the peripherals, providing weight, blood pressure, pulse oximetry, all those things, how are they feeling? How did they sleep last night? Did they eat today? These types of questions that would help us to assess their overall well-being. And we're seeing a much greater uptake, especially as it relates to just our traditional emergency services into these proactive care services that will allow us to assess, is mom or dad feeling well? Did they sleep well last night? And, are they leaving the home? How many steps did they take? These data sets or these data points that help caregivers and providers, assess the overall well-being. And so we are trying to amend or add to this already very technology-rich industry by providing these powerful insights that will help us drive better outcomes. And we're doing that through our devices that allow these other solution providers to gather this additional data.
And so what you're talking about really is a more holistic view of the patient or the person who might be on the receiving end. I know we're going to be hearing from Adam Pellegrini about that holistic view. How are there other specific things besides the vital signs that you all are zeroing in on to be able to really understand, what's going on with somebody? I know you mentioned a few things there, but are there some top things that, beyond the vitals or what were, the healthcare signs, these are other things we're looking for?
Yeah, I can chime in there. I believe that activity monitoring specifically, I mentioned it, when paired with assessing their overall cognitive response or how they're feeling, is a real key indicator of how somebody might be doing. We have a tool in our device that allows us to see when a person woke up or started moving that day. If we start to see these things decline, we know that they impact their overall health, their ambulatory systems, and things that help them stay healthier for longer. We are able to see if people are leaving their homes and going from one place to another. And, while we can check vitals and gather data, if we're not encouraging behavior that puts them in a better position, or at least maintains their position, then we're not driving better outcomes. And so we're really focusing in on technology that will help the users, the patients, to have better behavior and things that will drive better health outcomes.
Okay, great. Thanks for going in a little bit more on that. And this term psychosocial, I think, is something we're going to hear about from Adam that is really addressing some of that holistic view. I've got some questions that have come in, so let me go there real quickly. I think this first one will go to Dan. Please speak to the trade-offs between using devices patients already own, like a smartphone, a wearable or surveillance camera, versus newly developed specialty devices, knowing that existing devices offload the effort to develop the operating system, the user interface, and the HW.
Yeah, the hardware. Sure.
Hardware. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a good question. My perspective is you have to meet patients where they are today, right? And so not everybody is using the latest, greatest smartphone. I know a lot of people are purchasing wearable devices, smartwatches, but the data suggests that that's really not the people who are at most of need of care. And so it's a tricky question to answer for device technology related companies such as Omron and some of the other groups on the panel. And it has to be a balance, right? We have to innovate and move devices forward with new form factors, new clinical grade sensors. But at the same time, we have to make sure that whatever we develop is able to be integrated not only into a person's device, whether that's their phone, watch, earbuds, whatever it is, but into their life. And so I always like to start with the clinical outcome and back into the technology, as opposed to starting with the technology and trying to move into the clinical outcome. And so, in summary, it needs to be a combination of both, but it's important that we meet the patient where they are in the forms of technology that they're currently using them on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, and a real quick follow-up question to that one, Dan. If a specialized device is needed, will it be something the patient can buy, or will it be a rental device, or leased, I guess?
I think we're going to see, the remote patient monitoring industry. We could see both. I could see right now it's the industry is mainly led by a purchase type model where patients are buying these. Medicare covers a lot of the costs for remote patient monitoring. I know there's CPT codes for our VitalSight program and platform that includes the blood pressure monitor, the scale, the data hub. And so today we're seeing a more traditional business model for the hardware. I mean, again, I think we're in the first inning of a 9-inning game here. But there's no doubt in my mind that in the next few years, you're going to see that model evolve as some of the incumbents look for new models to enable the proliferation of these hardware devices into the homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for those comments. We do have some more questions, but Brock, I want to go to you real quickly, and then I'm going to follow up with a question on the integration of different devices and what might be coming next. So Brock, do you have any comments on where things are headed as far as devices and the integration with new programs?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in our world, we are creating these small cellular devices, and we're usually looking about 18 months to 2 years ahead. I'm sure Dan can relate to how long it takes to bring a new product to market. And I think as we look at devices that are capable of gathering information, I think we will continue to see, whether it's from major players that are out there like Apple's and Samsung's or even smaller players, the ability for people to gather data for themselves or for loved ones passively. And I think, as obviously we've seen in remote patient monitoring as a whole, it's extremely difficult for people to be compliant. And so as we move forward, I think we're working on ways to solve that problem through devices that are able to gather data passively. In other words, without people knowing that it's gathered regularly at similar times, and that the data is good and it's rich data. And I think there are challenges with that. We're seeing technology that's coming to market. Some of it's, not FDA approved. Some of it's very interesting, but being able to gather this, this vital information that helps to assess the well-being of a user passively will be key. We'll get much better participation, and we'll be able to gather data that will drive those better outcomes.
Great. And we do have that follow-up question. Dr. Al-Siddiq, let me come to you on that. So this is in regards to the incentives and getting patients to follow their programs. So can you speak to this customer engagement and, how people are responding even to, these new ways to understand their health situation?
Excellent question. And I'm going to kind of break that up into two categories, and based on what Amar and Brock were talking about, because really you have to bifurcate the population, right? So you've got these individuals who are rural based, and then there are people who are suburban based, and then you got people who are technologically savvy and people who are not technologically savvy. And so, and I'll give you a quick example. At Biotricity, we are dealing with diagnostics, and we put that into a separate category from our disease management program. And in the diagnostic space, we're getting much better adoption because it's really about diagnosing a condition. The doctor's coming in and saying, look, you've got a serious problem, and I need to figure out what's going on with you. And, we are finding patients that doctors have these mobile vans, which they drive 2 hours out because there's no access to cardiology for these patients. But when those patients come in, they understand the gravity of the situation. So when we're dealing with diagnostics, adherence is actually pretty good. Usability is always a mix, but adherence is pretty good because you've got a doctor that's coming in and saying, hey, I've got a problem. And to give you, an idea of size, in our cardiology network, we have about 5 million patient lives. How many are we doing in diagnostics? We're doing about 100,000 a year in diagnostics. So you're talking about a small piece of the pie. So what's happening with these other 4 million or so patients? Well, these individuals are really around disease management. And so this is about how do you engage in them? And, as Brock was saying, how do you collect data passively? How do you get them, they may not be using the latest smartphones, as Dan was saying. So how do you integrate this technology? And so when you're going into the disease management, you run into all of these issues of, do the patients have access to technology? Are they rural? Are they suburban? Because that depends on whether or not they have connectivity. Do they have the latest technology? Because you're going to deal with each of those groups and each of those use cases in a very different way. And so in disease management, we're finding adherence a lot more challenging. The best being somebody who is technologically savvy, is aware, has played around with technology, and has an interest, a natural instinct to be engaged, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got, the 85-year-old grandmother or grandpa who's living 3 hours away from their main GP, and they don't have the latest technology. So how do you deal with them? And that's where what Brock was talking about is passive data collection, stuff that is simpler, stuff that is independent from a smartphone. You're dealing with that use case. So we're seeing both of those, and I really think that when we talk about these things from remote patient monitoring, we should really break that category up and say, okay, in diagnostics, because that's the entry point, we can actually get very good adherence because you've got the doctor that's really pushing that message saying, hey, I really need to see what's going on with you. And that's where we see compliance very high versus RPM disease management, where compliance is a mixed bag depending on the group that you're dealing with.
Okay, great. Yeah, those are great comments. Thank you for that. We just have a few minutes left, but I want to turn the conversation to reimbursements, but keep on the topic of specific segments that we're trying to reach. So Umar, I'm going to come back to you here with this question. on reimbursements, designing programs that can meet the rural population, and then also what, for you in particular, what is the role of connectivity? We've heard a lot about 5G. We know fixed wireless has fixed wired has some limitations as well. And so how do you see reimbursements, the rural population, and technology? I know that's a loaded question, but give us a short answer if you can. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. I think what we found is that a lot of the more conventional models for reimbursement have really been designed with different environments, as sort of the primary constituents. They're maybe better suited to urban or suburban markets. And that's often because the technology can be harder to use and require things like broadband access in order to be used in the way that the regs are written, in order for sort of that fee-for-service reimbursement to be the right model. So we've taken a step back and asked ourselves, with our goal of driving better access and outcomes, what's the best model comprehensively? And the answer for us was to focus on value-based care. And so what you see us doing is really participating in the rural markets as an in-network provider who takes risk. And so we are entering contracts with health plans and participating in the more evolving models when it comes to traditional Medicare for value-based care, ACO REACH being the latest one. And what that lets us do is really align our incentives with those of the payer and the patient. And it means we can bring whatever we need to the party in order to deliver that great care. So for rural Americans right now, the state of play is, as you note, Elizabeth, broadband connectivity is pretty sparse. And so we've taken a page from our old Livongo playbook, which is to say cellular connectivity is a rock solid option. And particularly for things like remote monitoring, where you're not really moving a lot of data around, but you need reliability. It's drop dead simple for our members to use. They simply use a device like they normally would. The data automatically in the background makes its way to the cloud. And there we can take action when we see things that are noteworthy. The action for us is very typically by telephone. And so instead of burdening people with an obligation to use high bandwidth video or other things like that, we've really made sure that our business model and our coverage model supports the kinds of things we need to do technology-wise in order to deliver care to these communities.
Lots of things to figure out, and awesome that you're working on that. So I'm going to go to the rest of you and see if you can just, as the last thought, if you can keep it short, share with me, where you think reimbursements are going and whether primary care virtually is going to be really what we're seeing, in the future. That's what I'd like to end our question on there. So Brock, let me start with you on that. So reimbursements and the future of primary care delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that as we've seen, we're seeing a healthcare system that's becoming more innovative and that is willing to head more in the direction of reimbursing for care that's happening at a distance. And we saw that early in 2020 and even changes that have gone on since then. Some of the reimbursements have been pulled back, some others have been added, but I think we'll continue to see a healthcare system that's hopefully driven more by technology and allows us to provide more, to provide care and get paid for it. And the second part of the question, sorry, Elizabeth.
Let's see, reimbursements. Oh, primary care delivery and virtual care.
Right. Yeah, and our family, we've been using it. I think that as the aging population becomes more familiar with these tablets and smartwatches and other things, it's going to be more natural for them to tune in. They're already FaceTiming with their children, right? They're already communicating with their loved ones. Why not communicate with their doctor in the same way? So I think as that population ages, we're going to continue to see that group shift more in that direction.
Okay, great. Well, Kos, you're next here with thoughts on reimbursements and virtual care through with primary care delivery.
Yeah, so reimbursement for me, I think it's definitely transitioning towards value-based care and technology. We at Biotricity focus on technology innovation within the existing reimbursement models. So we actually leverage and build everything off of how CMS is reimbursing, and then try to bring technology costs down to the bare minimum, so everything still is set up as a profit center. So when we're going in and delivering our solutions, the reimbursement is already established. And I think that a lot of technology companies really need to look at, we're going through a transition, but we really need to work within the existing reimbursement models to see how to deliver value-based care and use technology to drive the costs down. And the second part of your question, I think virtual care for primary care is okay for general, ailments, general basic care. I think that we have room to go before virtual care will really make a dent in terms of the real issues that people are dealing with. We talked about sleep apnea, COPD, diabetes, cardiac. This is all specialty care. Specialty care means lab work. It means, what Omar and Dan were talking about, collection of clinical data, collection of blood tests. You can't deliver that on a virtual visit. So I think this intersection of remote patient monitoring and clinical devices with telemedicine is going to pave the way for true virtual care for the people who really need it and really require access for it. And until that integration happens, and I think we're a few years away from that, but I think that that's the direction things are going.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Dan, final thoughts?
Yeah. Let me take a slightly different approach with a call to action to my colleagues here today and the rest of the community. So if you look at the nexus of primary care and reimbursement, and you sprinkle in remote patient monitoring, I really think that we need to encourage the community to put more attention and focus on real world data and clinical evidence. And so I think the nexus of those three pieces will continue to grow if companies like ours, with all of the technologies that we have, are able to support clinical evidence with real world data. I think that's what will lead to a stronger reimbursement infrastructure. And so I encourage all of those joining today to move in a direction where we are providing real world clinical evidence that supports improved outcomes.
Great, thank you for those comments. Umar, you have anything final to say real short on this? I know you made a final comment on that question, but I just want to make sure in case you have anything to add.
Just in brief, I'm a believer. I really do think that primary care is going to be the medical home as we've hoped it would be. And as we shift more and more to primary care in order to allow providers to operate at the top of their credential, at the top of their license, they're going to be armed and supported with this remote patient monitoring data to care for people, particularly when it comes to chronic conditions that constitute so big a part of their panels. So I think all the signs are pointing towards a world in which we'll see more of this, and it's going to be very exciting to bridge the gap between the devices and the data and the delivery of care.
Yeah, absolutely. And connectivity is really at the heart of it, along with technology, innovation, and the two words that stand out for me in this discussion are choice and trust. Once again, the consumer requires that trust from all of the players in technology serving them, especially in healthcare. So thank you all for joining me today. Sorry, Jennifer wasn't able to make it, but this was an awesome conversation, and look forward to seeing you again in person. Have a great day and hang with us for just a minute. We'll be right back talking to Adam Pellegrini. Welcome back. What a great conversation that was. There really is so much to talk about. I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker, Adam Pellegrini, to talk about the evolution of care that has occurred over the past 2 decades. Adam has worked at CVS Health in their innovation group. He worked at Fitbit, now a part of Google, also at Walgreens, Microsoft, the American Cancer Society, and before that was an aviation medic in the U.S. Army. So thank you so much for your service, Adam. We have about 30 minutes to talk here and welcome your questions. So if you're in our audience, please add any Q&A to the Q&A chat box. We're going to talk about the evolution of care, the shift from analog medicine to digital health, and the role of monitoring and technology in patient outcomes. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome today. Let's start out with a brief introduction of your role at Jasper, and then we'll get into our questions.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much. The last panel was so fantastic and so many good key insights from the research you all have done, which has been amazing. I call it a mainstay of our industry for so many years. All the way to what we are now hearing from feedback from the folks on the previous panel. So Adam Pellegrini, CEO, co-founder of Jasper Health. I am about 1 year and 4 months in to this part of the journey. Incredibly exciting, focusing on connecting those that are experiencing cancer, their loved ones, to the broader healthcare ecosystem. So truly a mission-driven experience.
Yeah, and I really love what you're working on now. Can you give a brief explanation of Jasper and how you got involved in this group? And then we're going to go back in time a little bit and talk about the evolution of healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've been doing digital health 22 years. I think even longer than that, hence the gray hair. And I heard, the words, I'm a believer. I say that all the time. I say it, I'm a grizzled believer because I've seen so many iterations of this industry. I actually was introduced to Jasper Health from Redesign Health, the venture firm that incubates really great ideas after doing tons and tons of research on the gaps in the industry. How they found me was really not the CVS or the Walgreens or the Fitbit and Microsoft stuff, but really more the American Cancer Society. In the early 2000s, actually 2000, I was building out cancer.org for the American Cancer Society, where we literally were trying to solve some of the same things, connecting patients, educating them, caregivers, support. So this really was me coming back to one of my most passionate mission-driven roles. And using the technology we have now, and more importantly, the adoption of that technology now from consumers to try to make some of the things we originally wanted to do back then happen today.
Great. Now, when we were talking to prepare for this discussion, you did a very quick walkthrough from the year 2000 and think until the year 2022. So is there any way you can kind of run through that pretty quickly here on these points in time that you've experienced in your career and seeing some of the shifts as a direct result of technology innovation?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. In the very beginning, 2000 to probably 2005 or 6 at the American Cancer Society, we were really, building things for information seekers, those that are looking for information and content and education in health. But we're really, not at the point where we're seeing conversion into interventions as much. We did some work there in smoking cessation and other areas, but nothing really that was not just information, but action. At Microsoft, we built a product called Health Vault. Many say that was ahead of its time. I would say that that's probably accurate because now Health Vault would probably get tons and tons and tons of funding for its connected health infrastructure. And I can't tell you how many Health Vaults I see actually in the industry today, new versions of Health Vault, if you will. That really kind of set the groundwork for this idea of connected health. And I think in a very big way, right? So even one of my products was Health Vault Device Connection Center. And we were so proud to have our first connected device booth in a Best Buy. I think this was 2007 or 8. Omron actually was one of the first connected devices to Health Vault. So we built all of this infrastructure, a lot of learnings, not really the adoption I think that we wanted to see, but we saw it growing and growing and growing. A gentleman that's also part of your speaking series, Dr. Jim Malton, he and I built a company called Healthy Circles. We were both at HealthVault. That's where we really started honing more of this connected device and exception management and care coordination, care management concepts. That went on to Qualcomm Life, as folks may remember that. And then today he's doing biointelligence, an evolution of that connected device stuff that frankly we were doing again back at Microsoft times. So really a lot of the new ideas and the great ideas are evolutions and learnings. I will say at Jasper, we are a connected health infrastructure. We're foundationally about whole person health, as well as biometrics and other types of clinical data. But the root of it for us is patient first, consumer first, because that has been the biggest struggle for me throughout my 22 years is how do you get patients or those that experience in serious diseases to engage, connect, and then have interventions that prove outcomes. It's something I've been trying to crack for a long time. Jasper clearly, in my mind, is very, very much part of that journey.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that holistic view of care and, this psychosocial. That was a term that I found in looking at the Jasper site and some of the work that y'all are doing. Can you explain what that term means, and then how much of care that you all see is psychosocial versus, let's say, the clinical care that is, provided directly for the medical attention needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of goes also back to some of the days at the American Cancer Society. One of the aha moments when we did a lot of anthropological research for the build out of cancer.org was that caregivers were really, really not been focused on enough. And that caregivers and patients really had a lot of other concerns and issues going on outside the clinical realm. So think about financial toxicity, things around mental health, transportation, eating, diet, nutrition, all of those, medication adherence, all of those other things that are so critically important and weigh on an individual or a caregiver that really, unfortunately, hasn't really been addressed in a very big way. Jasper really has embraced the psychosocial element of care, holistic care, in that we know that there are amazing clinical centers out there delivering clinical care, clinical protocols, driving true outcomes around health, but they absolutely are sometimes just, really trying to focus on that clinical outcomes, and they need co-pilots to help them with patients and caregivers to provide that holistic care, those psychosocial services that can wrap around the core clinical protocols. For us, it's Memorial Sloan Kettering, one of the top cancer centers in the country. They have done just an amazing amount of work, and they have put so much research and time into both the psychosocial side as well as the clinical side. They've become a fantastic partner for us. I will say for Jasper itself, the 4 tenets of psychosocial for us really are that diet, nutrition support, mental health support, the idea of medication adherence. And that doesn't just mean reminders for meds, but it also means if you don't have resources to pay for copays, patient financial assistance, those type of things, how do we connect you to those resources using our nudge engine, which can actually push specific nudges to an individual based upon their needs. And then really looking at the idea of lifestyle coaching. So at Fitbit, we found that, there's a whole article in a magazine that talked about oncologists and oncology researchers really loving Fitbits and wearables. The reason why is because you get, and I heard this in your last session, the difference between sort of like the Fitbits of the world and clinical devices. I think the two paired together are brilliant. Why? Because Fitbits, we found at Fitbit, truly give you that longitudinal lifestyle record. And ambulation is critical. critical. So a friend of mine said, if we could create the most award-winning drug in the world, it should be called Ambulator, so that you take it. And what that Ambulator is really is just a prescription to walk. And so when you think about that longitudinal lifestyle biometric data, and then you think something like the BioIntelliSense BioPatch that gives you that clinical, very sort of FDA grade clinical data that layers on top of it, it gives you this incredible view of a patient's current state. Add on to that the psychosocial patient-reported outcome data, clinical data, you start really getting insights that we've never been able to derive before.
So we're stacking data information and integrating it together to provide a more complete view of actually what's going on. And that longitudinal lifestyle data, I had to write that down. So on the provider side, we've seen the technology advance, the innovation occur, the executives like yourselves who are really moving the market forward. We've also seen the consumer change, right? Expectations are in a whole new place for everything, right? Who would have thought you would, dial up a car with a random person who you'd pay to drive you somewhere, and you never met the person before, you have no idea who they are, right? These are things that we would have said, no way am I doing that, and we're doing them. So expectations from the consumer side have changed. Can you speak to how that is, how you're seeing that, and in particular, the pace of change? Is technology now almost behind the consumer's thinking and what they should be able to achieve with these devices in their healthcare?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, the co-founder of Jasper, Kira Wampler, she actually was the chief marketing officer of Lyft. And when
I didn't know that. Yeah.
When she's at Redesign as our venture chair now, but it still works with me on a regular basis, coming up with ideas. But really, the idea of Jasper was hers, and from her Lyft experience, she created that very consumer-focused, simple, automated experience for Lyft. Came and had a loved one experience, a serious disease like cancer, and said, why is there not something that is simple and automated and easy like Lyft for such something that's so critical? That was really the incubation idea of Jasper. When I joined, it really was this idea that it should be consumer first. We have to use the current technologies, meet the consumer where they're at, and really build the automation behind the scenes so it is that simple. If you think about your analogy around Lyft is perfect, right? They took a very analog system to disrupt taxis and the things where you had to hail a cab back in the day. I watched the show Taxi. That was a great show, but it's an example of how analog that was, right? And how do you automate all of that? But for the member, for the consumer, it's as simple as saying, I want to go here and it's going to cost me this much, hit go. We created that same experience for patients and caregivers and on the Jasper app. Now, I will say this, patients demand it now, and they demand to be met where they're at. We learned that in every role I've had at CVS, Walgreens, Microsoft. It's going to be, how do you deliver to that specific consumer in the mode that they want, when they want it. That's why we have a website. People ask me, why are you building the website? Because 93% of our members still use adaptive web on a tablet, because many of them are seniors, or a mobile phone and the web. So you have to meet them where they're at. And some of them choose, to your earlier research, to actually interact with our coaches, our care coaches, via video. So they'd rather do either asynchronous chat, do video chat, or leave me alone. I just want to use the digital experience only. So if you look at it from a provider or a care team perspective, a lot of folks ask, well, that's too much data coming in for the providers. I think we've gotten past that hurdle in a very big way. I had to address it a lot when we were at Fitbit talking to health systems. What do I do with biometric data? Now we have these systems around remote patient monitoring. Like Jasper, we built a triage dashboard, red, yellow, green, who needs help now, who needs help next week, who's doing just fine with digital alone. It's that exception-based care with that biometric data, the PRO data, the clinical data that can risk stratify in a very smart way. And then we use automation to kind of automate the mundane and let humans deliver the empathy, which is why I also am very passionate about hybrid care. Do not take the human, the clinician, the caregiver out of the equation. Just make it easier for them to be more empathetic.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And let's talk a little bit more about what a hybrid model means, and in particular, the role of technology, what technology can do and what it absolutely cannot do, or it cannot be, humans cannot be replaced. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I know that the industry has shifted in many different ways. The pandemic has absolutely changed things. There was a desire, and probably still is a desire, to botanize everything. Let's put a bot on that. To me, the problem is bots in themselves are more like automation, and automation is still important. You should automate the mundane tasks and to-dos, but you can't bot empathy. And I think we're starting to see outcomes around that. It's really difficult to, I saw a meme today that today's the anniversary of Skynet. If you remember the Terminator series, that was a sentient AI. So when people talk about AI that is self-aware and those type of things, that's kind of still science fiction. Maybe not for long, but kind of still science fiction. Today, what we have are rules-based logic and algorithms and machine learning, and it's hard to put empathy through that and deliver it in a very genuine way. And when it comes to cancer, you must be empathetic, and you must use systems of automation so you can be empathetic at scale. And that's really what we're built out in Jasper, is this idea of balancing the hybrid human coaches plus automation bots for the tasks and to-dos and reminders and nudges. And even risk stratification. But really, I think the future of where this is all going is if we can use that automation and those bots and those algorithms to risk stratify, if we can use that and hit maybe 80% of the workload, and you leave 20% so that providers, care team members, nurses, allied clinical staff can deliver more human-based interactions, that's the empathy at scale that we're shooting for.
Well, yeah, and being able to, a lot of healthcare providers may have a hard time wrapping their head around all this technology. It really is asking healthcare solutions to become IT, right?
Yeah.
IT now is the backbone of how everything is operating. And so can you speak towards the mindset shift that either has occurred or needs to occur more? And what's that mindset moving from, I mentioned earlier, going from analog to a digital world with healthcare is, and I hadn't thought of it like that actually until you mentioned it that way on our call. So, how dramatic is this shift? And then all of the business models and the investments that are required to really make it happen. How big are we talking? Do you have any kind of timeline that you might want to throw out to our audience on, the evolution and where we may see the next phases showing up?
Yeah. So I think a couple of points on this evolution. One, I don't know if it's the best phrase, but I've used it a couple of times because I actually believe it. We need to see clinicians as consumers, right? I remember I worked in the emergency room as a tech and an admitting rep in the late 90s at a hospital. I used some of their original sort of med tech type technologies that was all green screen. And I just remember thinking to myself, I would never design this, for myself. Who's designing this? Right. And throughout the years, if you notice, we have not placed a lot of emphasis on clinicians as consumers of the experience as we have on consumers as consumers of the experience. So I think you'll see this transition of it should just be as, a great experience for the clinician as it is for the consumer or the patient. And I think you're starting to see that evolution in this market. Look at some of the RPM software out there today. It's incredible. It's definitely light years ahead of we were a decade ago. I think we'll start to see automation on the clinician side. That's one thing we're focusing on, Jasper, is how do we actually do nudges and automate and risk stratify in an easier way for the clinicians so they don't have to think about it as much. Obviously, now their experience needs to be able to work with all the other experiences. And that's a good lesson learned from maybe one or two of my jobs is the modularity needed so that it could be both integrated with the existing systems and create sort of a homeostasis across those existing systems. I would say, what does the future bring? If my DeLorean actually had a real flux capacitor, I'd be able to go ahead and kind of tell you. But what I would say, there's tons of investment happening. The outcomes are being proven out now much more than ever have before. And big players will continue to push. I mean, you're seeing the Amazon work. They're continuing to test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. I still believe the retail pharmacies that are near and dear to my heart have a huge role to play in the hybrid care space moving forward. I believe still having a drugstore on every corner of the street that has a digital layer on top of it. To me, that's still a winning combination and huge opportunity for the future.
Okay, great. I've got a couple more questions I'm going to try and get in here. Tell me about the role of partnerships in the future of healthcare delivery.
Partnerships are critical. Every role I've had, for some reason, I end up in an ecosystem development sort of environment. At Walgreens, we created a Balance Rewards API, and we had almost, 30, 40 different API partners. Fitbit has one of the most robust API partners programs in the industry, both healthcare and fitness and lifestyle. CVS, others, all of them. And Microsoft Health Vault had 64 clinical partners in 2007. I think Jim Walt may have signed all of them. But really, this idea of ecosystem building is critical, if for nothing else, to create more seamless interactions for the consumer and for the patient. I think that is really a critical piece.
Yeah, it's really interesting because so much of what you say sometimes just sounds so much like the smart home space, the fragmentation, the requirement of partnerships for integration and the interoperability piece. Let me ask one more question about the role of the app, and this could speak to partnerships as well, but that, touch point for consumers to understand what's going on. So how important is the app in all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine used to use the word Appageddon in health, meaning that we have so many apps out there. How do we actually make heads or tails of this? I think apps on iPhone and Android are still critical. They provide us not only a means. I mean, one of my first products at Microsoft called My Health Info was literally a dashboard full of multiple little apps that try to bring your whole health world into one picture. That was 2007-ish. I believe this dashboard concept ever since then. I believe that your iPhone, I use an iPhone, or your Android itself is a dashboard. And what we see is apps do give you that ability, especially for serious diseases where their world needs to focus on a very specific area. It gives you that ability to go deep. It gives you that ability to truly engage in a very unique way. That being said, I also believe that things like FHIR and the proliferation of FHIR that allows data sharing around partners should mean that app ecosystem is interoperable with each other so that you're not have to manually transfer data from one app to the other app. So I think you'll see that evolution. I know HealthKit is doing that. I know Google is looking at doing that again. We'll see if there's a Health Vault 2.0 reunion tour. I think a lot of folks will start seeing this coming back to app portals that have interoperability between them.
Great comments, Adam. We are out of time, but I'd like to love for you to be able to close here with the story you shared with me about a Jasper Health patient who is experiencing cancer and was really had lost hope. And tell us how Jasper was able to help this person.
Absolutely. And he's very much won't use names or anything like that, but
of course
he's okay with us sharing this story. It's a very, very powerful story that members in Jasper that join, it's free on the consumer side. It's free for anyone to use Jasper if they're going through experiencing cancer. He joined, and it was right after hearing those horrible words that many of our loved ones hear all the time: "You have cancer." He signed up. He downloaded the app. But what he found was it was easier to start chatting with our coaches live. And then one of our coaches noticed that, it seemed like he was a bit, he needed an actual human interaction. So connected with him via video, literally said, I have no hope. I was just given this horrible news. I don't know sort of the path I'm taking. They're telling me to take these meds. Why should I? And what our coaches did was say, have you heard of clinical trials and have you looked at that? And what we just take for granted is that we expect that patients, consumers, truly know all these things out of the box. They don't. They were just given this news right away. And it was just that one idea that there could be a clinical trial out there to find gave him hope. And interactions with our coaches from there on gave him more hope, and then more hope. And now he has a regular interaction with our team. And so I think it really shows that human interaction, that empathy, and sometimes just connecting the dots for the patients on things that we think everyone knows, but maybe they don't know, could actually deliver hope. And I think that is what Jasper really wants to do, is we talk about empathy at scale. What if we can deliver hope at scale? And I think that's the future of digital health.
Absolutely. Well, I love the mission. I love the work that you've done in helping really the healthcare industry evolve and being a builder of our industry. So Adam, I know your time is so valuable. Thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Great. So we'll be back in just a second. If you can hang with us, we have another session discussion coming up. Thank you for joining.
Elizabeth. Thank you so very much, Elizabeth, and thanks to Adam for that interesting story and insightful talk. Next up, we have our panel discussion on the topic of wearables for health. If you haven't met me before, I'm Kristen Hannock, Research Director here at Parks Associates. I cover the health tech market, including the connected health devices and wearable space, where we're seeing some very exciting momentum and some very interesting developments. As mentioned earlier today, we have seen connected health products as a category hit mass adoption. Consumers are more engaged with their personal health information and personal health management than ever before. And they also want to be able to share this data with their care teams. In fact, over a third of consumers report that they are more likely to share, to select a care provider if that care provider allows them to share their health data through apps or through devices. The connected health device market is very large and complex, of course, with many different types of devices. Wearables in particular offer some key benefits for medical use cases. Wearables are the category leader for connected health products overall. Almost a third of consumers report owning and using a smartwatch, and over 20% report owning and using a fitness tracker. This category of products is leading the way for use cases including continuous monitoring of patients, episodic detection for various health events, as well as medical alerts and emergency response. To discuss some of the trends in this space, we have a really great lineup of panelists for today, including Morgan Hertel of Rapid Response Monitoring, Tejaswina Mishra of Stanford School of Medicine, John Mastrototoro of Movano, Shamel Patel of Aura, and Ern Watska of Garmin. Morgan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Rapid Response Monitoring?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here. It's going to be an interesting conversation today. As you know, my name is Morgan Hertel, and I'm Vice President of Technology and Innovation for Rapid Response. Rapid Response today is a critical events monitoring center. So on your worst day, when things are going bad and you need intervention, whatever that may be, whether that's a medical emergency or a fire alarm or a burglar alarm or anything like that, we're the ones on the other end of the phone to get you help. We operate today in all of North America, the Caribbean, and some international work as well. We've been in business for a little over 30 years today, and monitoring well over 4 million subscribers across that geographical area. So we have a pretty good handle on what's going on in the event monitoring space, which includes healthcare and some of the things we're talking about today.
Yeah, certainly a lot of insight into what is kind of going on in this market as it changes and evolves. Thank you so very much. I'm very happy to have you here. John, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do at Movano?
Sure, thank you. My name is John Mastrototaro. I'm the CEO at Movano. I've got an over 30-year career in the medical device industry. A lot of that was focused in the area of diabetes, where I helped develop the first continuous glucose monitoring system cleared by the FDA and developed it in conjunction with insulin pump therapy for people with type 1 diabetes. At Movano, which we are also a medical device company, and we're trying to develop solutions that are really helping people as they lead their lives with medical information that we distill down into something more meaningful and easier for them to appreciate and understand. We want to take the best of what you get from a medical device in terms of the accuracy, reliability, the data that's provided from it, and couple that with what you would expect from a wearable device, more of a consumer-oriented device in terms of the look and the feel and the app experience and whatnot. And our first product is going to be a ring designed specifically for women, and both the ring itself and the form and the app experience will be designed for women. We also have a proprietary RF technology developing a solution for non-invasive glucose and cuffless blood pressure, as well as other analytes. And I'm very excited to be part of this session today. Thank you.
So we're very happy to have you, John, especially the perspective you bring, so sort of a good view of the industry as it has been and where it's going in the future. But yeah, so next we have Tejaswina. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and about some of the work you're doing at the Stanford School of Medicine?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a research scientist in the Department of Genetics at Stanford University. We've been using wearables for quite a while, about 5 years now, to try to track and detect infectious diseases. And we've been also now expanding our research into using wearables to then track and monitor chronic illnesses as well. We've had some success detecting Lyme disease in one individual, and that was about 5 years ago. And now we're working on, we showed that you can use wearables to detect COVID-19 before symptoms start. And so we're very excited about that, and really excited to see sort of where that goes and where it takes us. We are currently running studies on COVID and long COVID, and really looking to also recruit people for our studies. And so if you're interested, go check it out at innovations.stanford.edu.
Yes, we're very happy to have you here with us, Tejas. And of course, I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say about how wearables and remote patient monitoring and these different connected health devices are being used in the clinical setting and in clinical research. So that came up quite a bit, I think, earlier in our panel discussion. So next, Shamil, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about some of the work you're doing at Aura?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Shamal Patel, and I'm the head of science at Aura. We make this 4-gram wearable health tracking device called the Aura Ring. My team at Aura is responsible for developing algorithms that power all of our health tracking features and insights, and accuracy and scientific validation are core to everything that we do. Aura has always been a science-driven company from the very founding, in 2013. And our mission is to empower everyone to realize health as a daily practice. And everything that sort of all of our features and solutions we build are geared towards making that happen. Aura pioneered the concept of readiness. We also have a really strong foundation in tracking sleep, activity, and making very accurate measurements of physiology like heart rate variability, temperature, blood oxygen levels, and respiration rate. I'm very excited to be a part of this panel and looking forward to a great discussion.
Yes, we're very excited to have you here and very much looking forward to kind of what you have to say. Yes, also with us is Aaron Watzke of Garmin. Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about some of the work you're doing there?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Jörn Watzke, and I'm responsible at Garmin for Garmin Health. Since 2014, we're working here. Everybody knows probably Garmin for their consumer wearables motivate consumers to be more active, live healthier, and the trend goes also there from fitness more to health. In Garmin Health, we believe that by opening the interface and improving the data quality, we can offer partners more and more services in the research, rehabilitation, and telemedicine. And this by high resolution data, real-time data, transparency, and also the benefit that you wear it every day. Meanwhile, we have a lot of experience there. More than 500 studies are using it, but we see it's just in the beginning, and I'm really excited to discuss here now in this round about the opportunities, but also the challenges in this market.
Yes, and thank you so much, Aaron. We're very much looking forward to kind of hearing your take on the market as well. And we had, I think, an interesting call a few days ago when we were establishing everything. I think you audience members, you're in for a treat. But yes, let's kick off this panel discussion with kind of an all-rounder question for really everyone. We talked a little bit earlier this morning about the different use cases and contributions that remote patient monitoring can bring. Let's maybe hone in a little bit specifically on the wearable story. What use case or application do you see as being the most valuable to healthcare that can be offered by wearables? As a note, we're also asking the audience this question, so there should be a polling question in the tab to the right of your screen that you can go ahead and feel free to answer. But yes, Morgan, can you maybe kick us off with this?
You're breaking up a little bit. Could you just say that again? I missed what you were trying to get.
Sure. So yes, my question to you is, what really is the most valuable contribution that wearables can make to the health space? What use case or application?
Yeah, sure. Well, the cool thing about wearables is that they're on you, right? They're not. They allow you the freedom to go anywhere you want, and to be able to live your normal life, whatever that is. And so whatever kind of wearable you're wearing, whether it's something that's manually activated or something that's tracking a particular thing in your life, whether that's sugar or blood pressure or whatever it happens to be, or a combination of those things, this really untethers you as a human being to go anywhere and do anything you want to. And that's really pretty amazing if you think about it. For those of you that have ever had to wear like a Holter monitor or something like that, where you had to walk around with this suitcase tied around your neck to get some long-term heart readings, you'd know what I'm talking about. But being able to be mobile and have this protection and ability to get help is pretty amazing when you look at form factors that are, less than an ounce in weight and fit in your pocket or around your neck or on your wrist.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, certainly some potential there with having the different factors being just so widely available. Tejas, can you tell us a little bit about maybe your take on this? And I know you're seeing with your work that you're doing at Stanford lots of different perspectives and intakes as well.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. I also had trouble hearing the question. Would you mind repeating that?
Sure. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about your perspective on this? So taking a look at what is the most valuable contribution that wearables can make to the health space?
Absolutely. Yeah. Great question. I think, as Morgan was saying, these things are on you all the time. And so I think the biggest value that wearables bring to kind of the health monitoring or healthcare space is this sort of continuous, real-time, passive monitoring. So like I'm wearing my watch right now, and it's continuously measuring my heart rate and metrics as I go about and do things. You're not so it's continuously measuring. It's in real time. So whatever is happening to me is being captured, and so you can imagine designing algorithms to then analyze that data and to figure out what's going on. And because it's passive, you don't really have to think about kind of designing it, at least from a consumer perspective. You do design algorithms for specific purposes, but you can essentially design things to catch any number of illnesses. And so to me, that's really the big value, is that you can employ wearables in almost any health space, whether it's catching infectious disease, whether it's monitoring prognosis of chronic illnesses, whether it's thinking about catching sepsis after one has had surgery, or using it to monitor transplant, rejection, for instance, patients who had organ transplants. Like there's just so many different uses for these devices.
Certainly, it's I think a great many different types of potential, and we are certainly, with some of the research we're doing, discovering more and more every day. Yes, actually, Tejas, that you brought up some very interesting points. John, can you tell us maybe a little bit about some of your takes on this, taking a look at what are really where you see as the most valuable contribution areas that wearables might do?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a couple of things. First off, in terms of a person using this for general application, I think there's opportunities for wearables to help educate one about their health, perhaps promote healthier behaviors and show the cause and effect between how their activities of daily living affect their health, and hopefully just provide peace of mind to people in general. But obviously, there's going to be moments in time when a health-related event is occurring, and I think in those situations, then there's a real opportunity to have a very fast determination when this health event is happening, to help people understand what's going on and perhaps point them in the right direction. And certainly getting some of this information to the healthcare team to help when an event like this occurs would be really important. And so I think there's those two general cases. One is for more general use, and then the other is when something does in fact happen. And it was mentioned just from our colleague from Stanford about maybe detecting when someone may have developed Lyme disease or COVID or has long COVID, different events occurring in their life. So this is really important, I believe, in general.
So yes, will you go?
There we go. Hopefully the echo is a little bit resolved now. Is that better?
Apologies, a little bit of technical issues.
Maybe if everybody would all mute, it would stop.
It's always a conference about technology, but I'm sure over the past few years we've all had these moments. But yeah, so very happy to kind of hear your thoughts on that matter, John. Shamal, can you tell us, I guess, a little bit about your take with Aura? I know you guys are looking at some very interesting use cases as well.
Yeah, I think if I had to kind of think about like the impact of wearables and the role that wearables can play in this space of health and well-being and also healthcare, I think there are three things that come to mind. Like one is that wearables will play a big role in making health and healthcare more proactive, right? We at Aura we talk about this concept of health as a daily practice, and what we mean by that is basically we want our members to understand the impact their lifestyles, their behaviors, their daily activities. As John mentioned, what is the relationship between what you're doing on a daily basis, the lifestyle, behavioral choices that you're making, and what is the impact of those choices on your health, whether it's your cardiovascular health, your metabolic health, your reproductive health, your cognitive, brain health. So I think fundamentally, health, wearables are changing the way we understand health by making it, very real time, something that you're tracking on a daily basis and not doing it like every 6 months when you go or a year when you go to your doctor, right? Checking your blood pressure or other vital signs. The second thing I think that wearables are doing is making health and healthcare more data driven. I think we are also seeing this in other aspects of health, right? But the data that wearables are capturing are really truly the only source of high resolution measurements about your behavior, your physical environment, and the context in which you are living your daily life. And this information is I think profoundly useful in making better decisions about your health and healthcare. The third thing I think I see from my point of view is also the fact that this data and the way we are using wearables will help healthcare become more personalized. Right? We are used to this more population-based healthcare approaches where we are looking at what works in a population or maybe subpopulations. I think as wearables become more a part of everybody's sort of daily life, and also especially as wearables become more and more capable of measuring your vital signs more accurately, there is more scientific validation and evidence. This data will be used to make decisions that are going to be more and more personalized to your health, right? So in the future, I think the way wearables will change healthcare is by essentially enabling you to make decisions, and whether they're about your treatment or choices in our lives, they're really based on what works best for you, not for a group of people who look like you or the whole population at large. So I think by what that will lead to is better outcomes, better better health and well-being that will be more sort of proactive rather than reactive.
That we heard a lot of good reasons for wearables. So one was the real time, the 24/7 that you measure continuously, because you consumer wearables you wear all the time, high quality data, high resolution, and a good point was also about immediate feedback if something appears. So these are all good arguments. I want to add one topic as well, and this is stigmatization. The people want to have consumer device. We see this, there were a lot of products in the market for elderly people, smartphones and so on. Nobody want to have a smartphone which say this is for old people. Everybody want to have the lifestyle products and say they have then the iPhone with this kind of letter size. And that's important. The people want to use consumer products, and this allow them to use it in their whole life, and we can be used then in the health and digital health solutions. And this open then also complete new services, as we have said. Usually the care ends quite often when the people leave the hospital. But after leaving the hospital, then the people go back in the normal in their normal behavior, and the monitoring ends. this is also a complete new area where the efficiency of the care will improve.
I'm excited to join the conversation as Kristen's working on getting her mic set up. You know, this virtual setup with technology still can be a challenge. But to add on to that comment there, we're talking about convergence there across medical and also those devices designed for fitness and wellness. And as we heard from Adam earlier, it really is stacking of various data and information that can provide a more holistic view of the patient. So, Tejaswini, did I say that right?
It's Tejaswini.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to come to you on that question. Can you talk a little bit about this blending of areas and where you see, consumer grade products moving into the care process and how that might work in the future?
Well, absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, I talked a little bit earlier about how we've, for example, used consumer wearables, Apple Watch or Fitbit or Garmin's to detect COVID-19 at a pre-symptomatic stage. So you can imagine that at an individual level, you're having people wear these devices and go about their daily lives. And we've seen sort of Bluetooth-based sort of contact tracing technology to warn people that, hey, you might want to stay at home. And so, at an individual level, we're expecting people, let's say they're getting real-time alerts on a dashboard and are being told, hey, you might want to go get tested for COVID. And potentially, in the future, we might have systems where you get an alert and that's linked to, your ability to be able to order a COVID test for yourself. And then at sort of the healthcare or provider or physician level at the clinic, where, one expectation might be that we're going to educate sort of clinicians also to be able to understand and handle and give advice to patients based on this type of data. And so you might imagine patients bringing in their wearables data into a doctor's office, because whenever you go to a doctor's office, you're just getting this sort of one-time clinical snapshot of what your heart rate is and what your respiratory rate is or what your blood pressure is, and it just feels so outdated when you can have continuous sort of real-time information to base your healthcare decisions on sort of this one-time snapshot. And so I'm imagining kind of what might happen is increasingly as our world becomes more digitized, as health becomes more digital, patients bringing in this data and then hopefully ushering in an era where we have formalized systems in place to actually for healthcare systems to ingest data and also then give advice to patients about their health. Not just whether you're sick or not, but what does your trend look like? And thinking about preventative healthcare, looking at your wearables-based digital biometrics. And then I could imagine, for instance, specifically in the infectious disease space, you could imagine at a sort of a community, health level, a public health level, you can imagine employing wearables devices to monitor, outbreaks. For example, if there's a cluster of spots or infections, people need to monitor those infections. Thinking about developing countries where there are a lot of infectious diseases that are epidemic, monitor, adding wearables component to all of the other monitoring systems that are already in place. So, for example, people can wait for look at environmental factors and, for instance, mosquito-borne vectors, and adding the wearables-based sensor component might have additional collection of data during them. So those are just examples of ways in which we could imagine wearables integrating into systems that we already have in place to back it.
Great. Well, and I think your sound there we might be having a little bit of trouble there at the end, but lots of good points made there on convergence and these form factors, as well as, the implications. I want to ask you, Morgan, a little bit about the role of monitoring. And what you're seeing here as more and more devices are coming into play. This creates a very complex environment. You have emergency responses and the monitoring that goes throughout. So tell us a little bit more about what Rapid Response is seeing in these areas.
So what you're starting to see is this sort of convergence of all of this. And by that, I mean, traditionally what medical PERS alarms were, it was a binary, kind of decision. It was either yes, somebody pressed a button or something happened, or no. And that's all you really had to go on. Sometimes you can talk to the patient, sometimes you can't. Just depends on what the situation is. And now you're starting to see where those starting to merge together. So a health emergency like a fall, for example, can be detected. And now we can take data like rests or heart rate or other things and merge that with it to understand, one, truly did that event actually occur? And secondarily, how bad is the patient right this minute? And whether that's a fall or a vehicle crash or something like that, we now have much better sense of what the patient was really having had happen to them from a remote location, even though we may not be able to talk to them or be able to see in. And that's starting to get, pretty exciting as we really start to look at having these sort of dynamic workflows based on inputs from different things. We're also starting to see some things that are not emergent in that, an ambulance is required, but a call to the doctor the next day might be appropriate, and something more than, say, a text message that would be able to handle. So in many cases, what we're doing is we're making an outbound call to a patient or to somebody that's responsible for that patient, saying, we're seeing glucose rapidly increase, or we're seeing heart rate change, we're seeing this. We need you to go see your physician today and get this looked at. And that's particularly helpful when you have an elderly person that, especially if they're on their own and don't necessarily have a caregiver, and they need another human being to be able to articulate to them and help them, and also, not frighten them at the same time. So all this kind of stuff is starting to merge and melt together, and it's an exciting time.
Well, yeah, and certainly lots of complexity, but lots of convergence with this idea of health to home and that huge senior segment that wants to stay in their home as long as they can safely, and also any caregivers or family members. Everybody has that interest in mind of keeping people in their homes. So, any comments on fall detection technology and where we might see that in the future? And Morgan, I'll go back to you on this one, and then if anybody else has comments on fall detection, I'd love to hear that.
So today, fall detection is probably the hardest thing to get right. We see something in the order of a 75 to 80% false alarm rate in fall detection when it's used all by itself. When you start to merge the other things together with it, that dramatically changes it. I think at some point in time they'll get it right. But for now, we screen, like I said, 75 to 80% of all those alarms out before they ever get to public service. And that's important for public service to be able to get those calls screened for them. They can't handle the volume of these devices connecting directly to them. It would just overwhelm them. But at the same time, when we look at our medical alarm portfolio, and we look at the numbers of alarms and the types of events that are happening, the vast majority of them are legitimately false. And it can be really a devastating thing to have happen to somebody, especially if they break a bone or cut themselves on the way down. Many times they just need help getting put back into a chair or put back into bed. But when it does go bad, it goes bad fast. And so it's important to be able to monitor for those kinds of things. And at the same time, we have to be cognizant that we can't overwhelm the public service with those kinds of events as well. So there's a balance that's always going on. So more data, like being able to use biometric data in conjunction with a fall detection that was generated from a number of different ways, that's pretty important for us, and will definitely start to revolutionize how well we can manage fall detection.
Well, great. Thanks for those comments, Morgan. And certainly technology plays a huge role in being able to detect all sorts of things. Integration of these products into the healthcare system is also a great challenge. And so, John, let me go to you here with this question. Can you tell us a little bit more about these devices getting integrated, and also to the mindset that providers need to be considering the shift there and what that looks like?
Well, I think there's a few realities that we have to face related to how the healthcare system operates today and how these may factor in. If we're going to try to go to for our annual physician visit and bring reams of data to our doctor and expect that they're going to look at all of it and try to, find out what's going on or use that to understand the state of your health, that's not going to happen. I think what we have to be cognizant of how to work our solutions into the healthcare system. And so if you're going in for an annual visit with your doctor as a provider of a wellness product with a solution, we may want to distill your, say, last 2 to 3 months worth of data down to a few key fine points and summarize this in something that the doctor can interpret and understand within moments, literally seconds, probably 10 to 15 seconds, because if it takes longer than that, it may not work in the healthcare system today. And so we have to understand, the time of docs and what they're doing and how they need to communicate with people and make sure that the products fit into that environment. And then, of course, in terms of data and sending data within the healthcare system, using the appropriate protocols. There's technical terms like HL7 and FHIR standard that are new protocols for data movement within one place another. And obviously the security of that data, encrypting the data, all of that is important, cybersecurity. So those factors need to be addressed. But there's, I think, tremendous opportunity because having longitudinal tracking of this wealth of data is really critical. And there's even some low-hanging fruit applications, certainly with big pharma, for example, conducting clinical trials and post-market surveillance. Imagine having all of heart rate data, SpO2, activity, sleep, et cetera, day after day over the course of a year for probably the cost that's much less than what it costs for a single office visit during a clinical trial. So tremendous opportunities in a number of ways, and those are just a couple where it would work its way into healthcare and have a tremendous amount of value.
Great, thanks for those comments. I think we've got Kristen back. Kristen, let's check your audio real quick.
Of course. Hopefully it is working fine right now. And thank you all so very much for bearing with us.
Great. You sound pretty good over here. So we were just talking with John about devices getting integrated into the system. And we do have a question that's come in. So maybe I'll just hand over the question and then Kristen, we'll leave it to you. So this may be a good question actually for Kristen with some of our research work, but the others as well. What adoption or market size difference is there between single purpose device like the PERS device or the Ring versus a multi-purpose device, examples, headphones with sensors or smartphone with sensors? And so let's see. Shamal, would you like to answer that question first around that? And then maybe we can go to Kristen if she has any comments based on our Parks Associates research data.
Yeah, sure, I can take a stab at it. I actually would challenge the notion that a Ring or any other wearable is a sort of a single purpose device. Just thinking about the Oura Ring, like we measure 3 out of the 4 vital signs, right? And so the data that we are capturing is incredibly rich in terms of the resolution, but also the modality. Most of the wearables on the market today are multimodal. They're capturing multiple aspects of your health from different measurements of your physiology. I think one of the things that I just kind of building on what John was saying, I think there is a strong need for generating evidence on data captured from wearables. This is fundamentally, I think we are going to be doing new science to discover new ways to interpret health and make decisions and make actions on this data. This is something that healthcare healthcare workers are not used to. So generating this evidence and backing any use cases, any interpretation of this data on solid evidence is incredibly important, right? And in terms of like research, right, one of the things that wearables do enable is to scale research at a population level, right? Like really do research in a way that can build confidence in the generalizability and applicability of these results. Like one example I would like to share is in 2020 when COVID started, UCSF came to Aura and said, hey, we would love to do a study in to understand how COVID manifests, what are the physiological changes that occur because of COVID, and whether we can predict COVID, right? And literally in a matter of, I think, 4 to 5 weeks, they were able to spin up this massive study and had about 65,000 Aura users participate in this remote decentralized study, contributed that data, and in a couple of years, a lot of science was built up to support the evidence that you can detect illness early on and essentially predict that you might be coming down with COVID or other types of illnesses, right? And this type of evidence is what I think drives the adoption of wearables, and also I think the different use cases, right? So it's not just COVID, but there are applications of Oura Ring in early detection of pregnancy that was done at UCSD, and similar. I'm sure there are a lot of other examples that people on this panel have as well.
Yeah. May I can add something to the topic? Yeah, I agree. And in the question, multi-purpose or single-purpose device, I think that is the wrong question. It's about what is the use case. And I think we heard in the beginning, one of the most important thing is the 24/7 measurement. And here, if you have here a ring or if you have a wearable, you have the big advantage to wear it all the time. So we at Garmin, we bring a lot of focus in this. That's the reason why we put a lot of focus in battery lifetime. That a watch, you can wear it for 2 weeks without charging, because we see that with every charging, you lose data, you lose customers, and so on. So I think that's a use case. So you have maybe use cases where you can make single measurements and where this is good enough, but the ease of use will then drive continuously measurement. And I agree, we had also many hundred studies are made. We have one was with NHS, they had to measure also respiration. And respiration, you know how annoying this is when you wear a nasal sensor or a thorax sensor. And then they decided, after measuring the data quality and see that the data quality is the same, then of course for the wearable, because for the user it's so easy, just wear a wearable as you do in your daily life, and you get the data. And this increase then the acceptance and then also the service. I think that's the right question.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely raising some very, I'd say, interesting points as well. I know, Tejaswina, you mentioned that you were interested in getting into some of the kind of the COVID topic, so taking a look at what's going on there.
Yeah, I think people shared quite a bit about sort of using, at the start of the pandemic, Shamal talked about working with UCSF, and we had kind of a similar experience where at the start of the pandemic, we were like, well, we can't have participants come in and kind of do a regular research because everyone's social distancing, everything's closed. We're like, well, but there is something we can do. And at that point, we'd already been using consumer wearables to look at Lyme disease and sort of respiratory viral infections. So we had sort of this mobile app and dashboard in place already that could essentially collect wearables data from pretty much any device. We're integrated into various platforms. And so when the pandemic started, we just kind of launched this study, and in 4 months, people were so sort of interested in helping and kind of making a positive impact that we were able to recruit 6,000 people just in about 4 months and kind of collect wearables data from them. We figured out, people told us if they had COVID and if they got a positive PCR test, and then shared their wearables data and symptoms data, and we were able to kind of look at that and figure out that in the large majority of them, over 80% of the COVID cases we were able to detect already, but it's like 20% that we couldn't detect with a robust signal. But out of most of the ones that we detected, the large majority were sort of on or before symptom onset, which, knowing that a lot of these infections are transmitted kind of at the pre-symptomatic stage, that tells you what you can do in terms of controlling the spread of infection. So for us, that was really valuable. And then we ended up sort of testing, building a real-time alerting system where we send real-time alerts to people, and sort of like a yellow alert and a red alert. So it's like a two-stage alert where, if your heart rate has been elevated for a while, which is the primary metric we're looking at, we tell people, hey, your heart rate's kind of elevated. And then if it's elevated for a very sustained period that's not explained by exercise or anything else, then we let people know, hey, like your heart rate's been elevated for quite a while. And then trying to see how often we send red alerts to people, and when they give us feedback on what's going on or whether they're sick or whether they're feeling symptoms, how often are we really able to catch that? And so even with that, we have a sort of sensitivity specificity rate of somewhere in the 80s basically, which is, for a starting point, not, if you want to again deploy at sort of consumer level, obviously you need to improve your sensitivity and specificity, but for a starting point, this is really, really great and quite promising.
The other thing that we're starting to do is to take, input from disparate systems. So, for example, you may have a fall detection device that doesn't have any kind of biometric metering or readings to it, but something else that they're using does. And so we'll get an alarm or an event from something, and then we'll reach out to these other platforms and say, tell us a little bit more about this patient. Is their heart rate out of normal? Is their O2 out of normal? Is there something else that's going on? And then we can take, and digest that and start to make decisions on how we modify our workflow if we do, in order to get somebody help faster, or potentially to change who we call and when we call. So there's purpose-built stuff, but there's also other things that are ancillary to purpose-built things that can also help you get that same data and end up with a positive result.
Yeah. I agree, and Morgan, what you said about the false detection and so on is a very good example. We have seen pure false detection is pretty well working for activities. So we have this in our bike computers and running whatever there, fall you can really easy can detect. If an 80 years old person is falling, you cannot detect, because this is not falling. It's like a slow moving down, and and agree. You need other parameters. You need to see the heart rate. You need to see a lot, and the magic is the mix of many data points. And we see this. This is also the source for risk detection, for many other things. We know, you have seen this in the COVID study, the body is sending signals. And this is, I think, where we should invest in the future more and more in this kind of researches to detect risks early. We know that when you get in the pre-diabetes phase, that your deep sleep phases is increasing. This can have also many other root causes. But if you see many parameters, we can detect this kind of thing with very high probability. So, and this is where we are really excited to work in the future.
I mean, think about what this space looked like even 3-4 years ago. I mean, if you look at the amounts that it's advanced in the last 3 years, imagine what it's going to look like 5 from now. It's going to be completely different in what we can do. The miniaturization of stuff is just incredible. And look what they did with a ring. I mean, there's a lot of technology stuffed into a very tiny form factor.
And important is, we should not forget, and we heard this in the presentation ahead from the colleague from Jasper Health, is the patient or consumer. We should treat them as a consumer, and this helps us from the consumer side, that we should treat them that they love it, they like to use it, and then it will be also successful.
I agree with that. I think we get feedback from our study participants who've been using all of these different devices. And there are some devices that you might need to charge them every day, and then there are others that don't need to be charged as often. Maybe you're in the shower and you take it off and you charge it and then you put it back on. And obviously, I agree. Ring is a lot easier to use, and in nighttime data, resting heart rate from nighttime is incredibly valuable data. And you can only collect that if people are willing to wear your device when they're sleeping at night. And so then having a device that's actually comfortable and makes people want to wear it at night, it makes a world of difference in the data that you can collect and the things you can detect with this data.
Yeah, the trade-off I think we're looking at is the resolution and the quality of data that you're capturing. So if you look at a ring or a wrist-worn wearable, the in terms of the resolution of the data, it will not, at least today, it won't be comparable to like a medical grade device, right? And in some cases, it is getting there, but medical grade devices are going to generally sort of outperform wearables. But the fact that you have continuous longitudinal data that medical wearables or medical devices can just not get, I think that's where a lot of the inherent advantages come from in the wearable space. And I think that this is, from my point of view, I think this will have a profound impact in just how we think about health and healthcare.
Yeah, we're also looking at a lot of the data that comes from the devices, the raw data, and looking at newer signal processing techniques and ways of filtering and using machine learning and other mechanisms to improve the accuracy of the devices when used in various scenarios. It's interesting today when someone goes to measure their pulse ox or their heart rate, they're at rest, right? You're in a doctor's office, you're anywhere in healthcare, you're at rest. Most of these products are very accurate when you're at rest. But we're wearing these products when we do all our daily activities. I'm waving my hands around when I'm talking. People are walking, jogging, doing all sorts of things. And then the signals get pretty noisy at times. And there's a lot that needs to be done to try to filter out the noise and capture the signal within it. And those are some of the challenges that certainly we're focused on, because we're treating everything like it's medical data. But all the players are looking at these issues in general. But there's a lot of value in having the longitudinal assessment day after day or night after night, looking at how resting heart rate's changing, what's happening with heart rate variability. These are all indicators that the wearable companies are monitoring today, and they're going to add a lot of value in the future of healthcare, just in terms of trending what's happening with the data over time. It's very exciting, and as Jorn just mentioned, there's applications. Maybe you can understand when someone's starting to get pre-diabetes based upon their sleep and heart rate and other factors all combined and coupled together with machine learning algorithms. So it's a very ripe area for innovation right now, because we've got this wealth of data at our disposal and we can leverage all of it. We're all measuring multiple parameters, and we can leverage all this data to help us with assessments and diagnoses of conditions. And like Lyme is, as has been mentioned, is really difficult to figure out. It's really, really hard stuff. And obviously COVID has come up, and the sensors and looking at the temperature and the sleep and other things have just, spot on identified when someone's having a fever and other scenarios. So this is really cool stuff. And I think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of progress in the next several years, and adding more measures to these systems over time. There's other, we're using some RF technology for approaches. There's some more novel optical approaches being evaluated to see what other metrics and analytes we can measure, so we can have a really comprehensive look at someone's health. And so I'm just really excited about this space in general, and the work that all of the folks on this panel and others are doing in this space.
One other thing I would like to kind of mention is that when we look at wearables, a lot of the work that we do at Aura, we always benchmark against, usually like a clinical grade, medical grade product or standard, right? So for example, for sleep, we benchmark Aura's algorithm performance against polysomnography-based sleep assessment. The thing is that these clinically accepted standards, besides the fact that what John mentioned, that they're actually captured in very controlled settings in scenarios where we don't live our lives in those scenarios, right? Besides that fact, it's also true that these standards have some limitations. Even though we refer to them as gold standards, doesn't mean that they're perfect or 100% accurate. Like, for example, just the polysomnography. If you give like a few human raters the same data and they would rate it, according to the gold standard, they would agree about 80% of the time, 83% of the time. So, it's not perfect, but it's accepted as a clinical sort of gold standard. I think the real opportunity is that once we start, benchmarking and assessing the performance of these wearables against these gold standards, get to a point where we think, hey, these are, the wearables are actually giving us data from a quality point of view that meets that. But at some point, I think wearables will start exceeding that gold standard. And so I think there will be potentially, I think, a new standard created by wearables in the future where the way we measure sleep or other aspects of your physiology are going to be referenced based on what wearables do, and there will be some new standards that come up. One example of this is we had a study at UCSD where they looked at pregnancy. And one of the most remarkable findings there was that based on the data that is captured by the Oura Ring, the researchers there were able to detect conception 5 days out, essentially detect that you're pregnant 5 days out after conception. And that's basically 9 days before, you can confirm that reliably with a home test, right? Which is the standard here. I think there are lots of interesting implications of this type of new capabilities, legal, all sorts of implications. But there are already examples of really profound capabilities that come from the data that is captured by this. And I think it's going to be quite exciting how we figure out what the solutions are and how we put some kind of even some guardrails on how we what we do with this data.
Yes, we have, I think, a great many years of interesting kind of policy discussions, more research to be done as well. So lots of evolutions taking place. We do have a few minutes for questions from the audience, and we do have one question in. It looks like it's aimed at you, Morgan, asking if there is any technology being developed that uses predictive analytics to determine if somebody may be at a high risk for a fall, possibly suggesting ways to help reduce such risk.
Yeah, and you're starting to see video being used for this, where they're looking for changing gait, for example. I've also seen some applications using LiDAR and radar, and even to a lesser extent Wi-Fi, where the idea is to start watching people's patterns and their gaits to see if they're becoming more likely to fall unsteady on their feet, their gait shortens, or those kinds of things. It's not in our world yet, but I don't think it's far off to be able to be used in home environments. We're seeing it deployed on the video side in nursing homes or those kinds of places where you have staff to be able to pay more attention to somebody versus somebody that's living at home alone and is somewhat self-sufficient. But I don't think it's far out. And I think wearables can also start to play in that world too, so they can start measuring walking patterns and stability patterns and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, certainly a lot of work being done in the field of machine vision, and another potential area for wearables to play a major role as well. So yes, it looks like we're about at time. I'm not sure, does anyone have any maybe closing thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with, or maybe if the audience is quick enough, they can get in one last question.
I have one comment to make, and this is kind of a follow-up on what John and Shamal were saying earlier. Is we're one of the things we still, I think, haven't figured out is wearables, and this is where, for me, potentially kind of the challenge, but also the sort of discovery and excitement lies ahead. Is when you look at the signal coming off of sort of a wearables device, you don't know all of the sort of sources of input into it. You don't know what are all the different physiological inputs that have gone into kind of producing that signal. Like John was talking about, we're not using them in controlled environments. We're moving, we're jumping around. And so how that affects the data, how whether you've been exercising or eating or drinking alcohol, or you took a plane flight, or you're at a different altitude, how all of that affects your wearables data. I think that's something we don't fully have a handle on. And I think that does affect what you'll see in the data and your ability to detect things. And I think to me, that's sort of a big challenge that lies ahead is obtaining really good labeled data from people where you have these labels where people are telling you what they're doing at any given moment and kind of having information if they're taking medications that might alter some of their vital signs. And then building your predictive algorithms using that data to kind of understand if you can deconvolve some of the signals that go into producing a final output, like what are all of the different ways in which all of these physiological inputs affect the final data that you see. And I think that is a big challenge, but for me, that feels like kind of an exciting frontier that we just kind of need to push at and reach, and that'll give us better predictive power. I think there's a sort of very big future ahead where I can imagine wearables devices being used in pretty much any healthcare space. It's sort of the future is kind of yours to imagine, really. Yeah.
And not even just healthcare as in aged, but really things like lone worker, hunters, campers, vacationers, sports people. I mean, anytime somebody's in a place where their health could be negatively affected either because of a health reason or the environment that they're in, this stuff starts to make a heck of a lot of sense.
Yes, I do have my my Garmin Venu 2S that I've been enjoying, and it does actually help me make decisions about what I want to do in a particular day. So I found it to be very, very insightful.
I love my Garmin so much that it was stolen out of a rental car, so I am without it, but I really miss it because it was very insightful, the kind of information that it gave, and I did like, you know, being able to get a week or two of battery life out of it. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Good. So that's a good base to measure more data and develop new services.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you also very much, everyone, for joining us here today. It was a wonderful discussion. Apologies for some of our technical issues that we had, but again, thank you for bearing with us.
Thank you for having
me. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
But yes, thanks to everyone for joining us for this panel discussion. And for all of you, either at home or in the office today, we hope to see you back tomorrow for the second day of this event. Tomorrow's event will be on the subject of the new business models we're seeing both here in 2022, as well as what we expect to see in the coming years. Again, a special thank you to our sponsors, ADT Medical Alert, Alarm.com, Early Sense, Johnson Controls, Rapid Response Monitoring, Becklar, and Independa for helping to make this event possible today. As a reminder, everyone here currently has access to all of the rest of our virtual sessions. This includes everything that was recorded earlier this year, as well as the recordings for both today and tomorrow. As well, you also have access to our upcoming event on October 6th, looking at the subject of seniors and family caretakers as well. We do have some new connected health research available, both already published and on its way. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, this includes both our consumer survey studies on telehealth and remote patient monitoring, as well as senior living, taken from our multi-year trending studies of U.S. internet households, as well as our upcoming industry report on the state of the connected health market. In addition to our syndicated research on this market, can you go to next slide, please? We do also offer custom services as well. Next slide, please. This includes both custom and individualized research engagements, as well as custom marketing services, including white papers, webinars, and podcasts from our Connected Consumer podcast series. Again, if you are interested in sponsorship or research here at Parks Associates or speaking at one of our events, these are the people to talk to. Again, thank you all so very much, and hope to see you back again tomorrow.